Here's what nobody tells you about deep work. Cal Newport didn't write this book to make you more productive. He wrote it because he was scared. Scared that an entire generation of smart people were going to spend their whole careers being busy and never once produce something that actually mattered. Now you've probably seen the 4 rules already. Quit social media, schedule your focus blocks, work less, embrace boredom. Fine, that's the Wikipedia version. What you haven't heard is that Newport's actual argument against your phone isn't the one you think it is. It's not that social media is evil, it's a logic error. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it in your own life. You also haven't heard that this book was written by someone who, by his own admission, had almost none of the constraints most people actually live with. No kids yet. A university job that protects deep thinking by design. And that matters because if you've ever tried to disappear for 4 hours while also being a parent, an hourly employee, or someone whose boss pings them on Slack every 6 minutes, you already know something Newport doesn't fully address. So today we're doing this one properly, not the 4 rules, the stuff underneath them, and to really get down to that foundational layer. This research pulled from a genuinely contradictory stack of material. We're centering on Newport's own 2016 book, Deep Work, but reading any productivity book on its own is dangerous. You end up trapped inside its logic without ever testing it. So this also draws on a clinical academic review looking at the hard data behind corporate time wasting, which is grim, honestly. It brings an analysis from Wharton on the habits of peak performers. But the most important piece of all this is the pushback found in online communities, real-world discussions from people actively trying and usually failing to apply these ivory tower concepts to their messy, complicated lives, because none of this is neat and tidy in practice. So the mission today is to dissect the actual reality of cognitive focus. Not the neat bullet points, the biological systems underneath them, the glaring contradictions in who can actually afford to live this way, and what this really means for your own life. Now, if we want to understand the DNA of this whole philosophy, we can't start with the rules, we have to start with the architect, who he actually is. And this is the context almost every summary completely ignores. Cal Newport is not a life coach. He's not one of those former hustle culture tech figures who burned out, disappeared to some retreat, and now sells courses about inner peace. He is a theoretical computer scientist at Georgetown University. He cut his teeth in MIT's theory of computation group, which is a completely different world. His actual day job involves standing at a whiteboard, proving abstract mathematical theorems about distributed algorithms, and that explains basically his entire worldview. Academia, especially theoretical math and computer science, runs on a totally different clock than the normal corporate economy. Think about your standard corporate job. Your survival there depends on responsiveness, on visibility. How fast did you reply to that panicked email? Did you speak up in the morning meeting? Was your Slack status still green at 4:45 in the afternoon on a Friday? The green dot of anxiety, proof that you still exist to your boss. But in the theory of computation group at MIT, nobody cares about your email turnaround time. You are judged brutally on one single metric. Did you produce a peer-reviewed paper or a mathematical proof that actually advances the field, something nobody else has done? Did you create a body of work that will outlive you? And that brings us right back to the fear inside the hook. When Newport claims deep work is the superpower of the 21st century, he isn't just handing you a catchy subtitle. He watched, up close, what happens to brilliant academic minds who couldn't protect their focus. And the chilling part is how they declined. They didn't go down in flames. There was no dramatic public failure. They just faded. They showed up to every conference, joined every committee, answered every email the same day. They were incredibly busy. And 20 years later, they had nothing to show for it, no legacy, nothing to point to after decades of work, often while quietly annoying everyone around them in the process. Now here's the part where the whole premise starts to strain. This can feel completely disconnected from reality. Think of academia like being a novelist with an extremely wealthy patron. Your only job is the manuscript. The patron handles the house, the plumbing, the logistics, the marketing. You just sit in a room and write. But for the rest of us, for anyone listening to this right now, our jobs are essentially answering the patron's emails. We are the logistics, we are the plumbing. So how does a framework built inside an ivory tower survive the modern open plan office? If your job is client services and you ignore your clients to think deeply for 4 hours, you don't win an award for it. You get fired. So is this whole framework just built for tenured professors and eccentric authors? That's the exact friction point that trips everyone up. And to understand why this actually does apply to the person in client services, we have to establish what Newport really means by depth versus shallowness. Deep work is not just thinking hard, it's professional activity performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that pushes your cognitive limits to their absolute maximum. These efforts create new value, they improve your skill, and critically, they are fundamentally hard to replicate. If a college intern could learn it in a week, it isn't deep work. Shallow work is the opposite. It's the logistical, non-cognitively demanding tasks, usually done while distracted. Replying to a reply or email chain about the break room fridge, that's shallow. Formatting margins on a slide deck, shallow. But brainstorming a genuinely new approach to a systemic supply chain failure, that's deep. Take Jason Ben from The Material. He was working a mind-numbing consulting job and realized his entire existence had become moving data between spreadsheets, a human rotor. He knew he was replaceable, so he made a radical choice to learn computer programming in order to escape. But you can't learn to code while half listening to a podcast and checking Slack every few minutes. It requires intense, sustained concentration. He had to lock himself in a room with no internet and just a textbook. And he talks openly about the physical friction of that. His brain kept screaming at him to check his phone, to get some small hit of relief from the discomfort of not understanding the code. It's agonizing at first, but he forced his brain to adapt, learn the skill, and completely changed his financial trajectory. He escaped the shallow trap. Now contrast him with Jack Dorsey, the former CEO of Twitter. The Material notes that Dorsey used to end his average day reviewing 30 to 40 sets of meeting notes. He worked at standing tables in the middle of the office, so anyone could interrupt him at any moment. He genuinely loved that kind of open, serendipitous availability. But is Jack Dorsey's work deep? Absolutely not. His attention residue must have been enormous. And it's worth pausing here to actually explain attention residue, because it's the biological mechanism that makes a schedule like Dorsey's so dangerous for the rest of us. It's a concept from Dr. Sophie Leroy. When you switch your attention from task A to task B, say from writing a report to checking a quick email, your brain doesn't instantly switch context the way a computer would. A significant chunk of your cognitive processing power stays fixated on the original task. That residue means you bring a diminished version of yourself to the email, and when you switch back to the report afterward, you have even less capacity than before. You end up operating with a handicapped mind for the rest of the day. Jack Dorsey was, by this logic, basically living inside a permanent state of attention residue. But here's the paradox. He was a billionaire. He was by most measures incredibly successful. So Newport does acknowledge this. There are corners of the economy where depth isn't the primary currency. But here's the trap. Most knowledge workers don't have an army of people executing their serendipitous ideas for them. For the rest of us, depth is the only real way to create value that can't be replaced. We see a tech CEO operating entirely in the shallows, and we mistake that for leadership, and we copy the chaos without any of the structural support that makes it survivable for him, which explains that staggering figure from the Journal Review on corporate time. Why are people spending 60% of their work week on electronic communication and internet searching? Why is 30% of that spent strictly reading and answering emails? If deep work is what makes us irreplaceable, why do we keep designing our entire working lives around being interrupted? Because honestly, we don't actually know how to measure our own value anymore. This traces back to the industrial age assembly line. 100 years ago, productivity was completely obvious. How many physical parts did you build in an hour? Frederick Taylor's version of a widget. The metric was sitting right there in your hands. But in the knowledge economy, what exactly is a widget? What does a senior marketing strategist actually produce on an ordinary Tuesday? Because we lack any clear, measurable metric for abstract thought, we panic, and we default to a proxy instead, busyness as a stand-in for productivity. In the absence of any undeniable indicator of our own value, we turn to doing a lot of visible stuff instead. If I'm sending emails at 11:30 at night, I must be indispensable. If my calendar looks like a solid wall of meetings, I must be important. It becomes a kind of psychological shield, proof of our worth held up for whoever happens to be watching, so we end up hiding behind busyness to justify our own paycheck. And the thing that makes that frantic, around-the-clock performance possible in the first place is the technology sitting in our pocket, which brings us to the actual argument against the phone. And this part matters because it strips away all the moral panic about kids these days and reduces the whole thing to a pure logic error. This is the any benefit mindset. It's how almost everyone justifies their digital habits. And it's incredibly insidious. It dictates that you're justified in keeping an app or a tool if you can identify literally any conceivable benefit to using it, or anything you might possibly miss out on if you don't. I need this app to stay in touch with old college friends. I need that one for breaking news during an emergency. Or the classic, I need Slack on my phone at my kid's soccer game, just in case the company servers catch fire. You find one tiny, microscopic, wildly improbable benefit, and suddenly that app earns a permanent pass to live in your pocket, harvest your data, and buzz at you constantly throughout the day. It's a bit like keeping a broken neon slot machine in the middle of your living room, because 5 years ago it randomly spat out a coin. You don't care that it takes up half the room, ruins the whole aesthetic, and flashes lights while you're trying to sleep, because what if it pays out again? And we don't just keep that machine in the living room, we carry it in our pockets, we set it on the dinner table, we sleep with it next to our heads. Newport counters this with what he calls the craftsman approach. A true craftsman doesn't adopt a tool just because it might be vaguely useful once. They ask a much more rigorous question. Does the value of this tool outweigh its negative effects compared to the alternative? A woodworker doesn't buy every saw in the hardware store. They evaluate whether a specialized tool actually improves their core work, and whether the cost of storing it and learning it is worth the marginal gain. If we ran that same ruthless cost and benefit analysis on our own apps right now, almost none of them would survive. Does seeing a distant cousin's vacation photos genuinely outweigh fracturing your attention span to the point where you can't sit with a physical book for 10 minutes without twitching? Of course not. But we never actually run that math. We just accept the broken machine sitting in the room. And once you face that reality, once you accept these tools are quietly draining your cognitive capacity, the next question becomes, how do you actually get that depth back? How do you restructure your physical life around it? Newport's answer starts with a theoretical architectural concept called the eudaimonia machine. Eudaimonia is the ancient Greek idea of complete human flourishing, and an architecture professor named David Dewayne designed a conceptual building around it. The whole structure is a linear progression of 5 spaces, meant to pull you deeper and deeper into concentration, almost forcing your brain through the gears. You enter a gallery of inspiring work, then a salon for discussion, then a library for research, then an office for lower intensity tasks, and finally, you reach the chamber, a soundproof room built for nothing but unbroken deep work. It's a genuinely beautiful physical version of the psychological state we're after. But since almost none of us have access to a 5-chamber architectural marvel, Newport gives us 4 philosophies instead, ways to simulate that same depth in an ordinary life, and picking the wrong one for your situation can quietly kill the habit before it starts. The first is the monastic philosophy, the most extreme version. You eliminate shallow obligations almost entirely, essentially disappearing from the logistical world to protect vast unbroken stretches of focus. Donald Knuth, the legendary computer scientist, is the classic example. He doesn't use email. If you want to reach him, you write a physical letter, and his assistant prints it out for him every few months. Or take Neil Stephenson, the science fiction author, who avoids email and social media entirely, because his logic is simple. Given long, uninterrupted time, he writes visionary novels. Given constant interruption, he just writes a lot of very good emails instead. The cost of all those emails is the death of the novel. But here's the honest reality check. Unless you're a tenured genius or a best-selling author, the monastic approach will get you fired within the week. Tell your manager you're only accepting physical mail from now on, and you'll be clearing out your desk by Friday. So for most people, there's the second philosophy, the bimodal approach. dividing your time into clearly defined stretches. Some periods are purely for deep work, lived almost like a monk, and the rest of the time stays fully open to everything else. Carl Jung is the classic figure here, the stone tower in the woods. He ran a busy clinical practice in Zurich, lectured constantly, mentored students, but he knew he needed profound depth to develop his theories of psychology, so he built an actual stone tower at Bollingen, no electricity, no running water, and retreated there for weeks at a time before returning to Zurich and becoming fully available again. He swung like a pendulum between the two states. A more modern example comes from Wharton professor Adam Grant, one of the highest rated teachers there, deeply involved with students, and also an extremely prolific researcher. He runs a bimodal schedule by batching entire semesters. All his teaching and office hours go into the fall, when he's fully present for students. Then in spring and summer, he flips the switch entirely into research mode, effectively disappearing. But again, looking at this critically, the bimodal approach requires real macro control over your calendar, the ability to dictate entire months or seasons. Most people are stuck on a daily deliverable cycle and simply don't have that kind of authority over their time. Which brings us to the third option, arguably the most practical one for most people listening, the rhythmic philosophy. This is about turning deep work into a daily habit, same time, same place, every day. Take the case of a PhD candidate named Brian, working from the book, who had a demanding full-time job and a brand new baby at home. He couldn't build a stone tower in the countryside, and he couldn't disappear for an entire semester. So he used the rhythmic approach instead, waking up every weekday and working on his dissertation from 5 in the morning until 7:30, before the baby woke up, before the emails started arriving. He built an unbreakable chain, day after day. And the real brilliance of the rhythmic approach is that it removes decision fatigue entirely. You don't have to decide when to work. It's 5 in the morning. You sit down at the desk. That's the whole decision. Which leaves the fourth, and definitely the most misunderstood philosophy, the journalistic approach. The name comes from the way journalists can pivot straight into writing mode the moment news breaks. It's about slotting deep work in wherever an opening appears. A meeting gets cancelled. You go deep for 45 minutes. You're waiting at an airport. You open the laptop. Walter Isaacson is the famous example here, casually switching into focused writing mode on a family vacation, then switching right back to being present with his family a few minutes later. But here's where it gets genuinely dangerous. People read the book, see these 4 options, and immediately think, I'll just be journalistic. That sounds so flexible. I don't have to wake up at 5 in the morning or build a tower somewhere. That's a trap. It's a bit like trying to run a marathon with 0 training. Just because you happen to have a free Sunday afternoon, you'll pull a muscle and quit halfway through. The journalistic approach actually demands the most practiced, rigorous discipline of all 4 because there's no external structure forcing you into it. Nothing forces the switch. If your brain isn't already trained to drop into intense focus on command, that sudden free hour won't turn into deep work. It will turn into 60 minutes of scrolling and reorganizing desktop folders instead because your body won't let you do the harder thing yet. And this points to a biological reality people don't like hearing. We assume focus is just a choice, a switch we flip whenever we want, but research suggests it behaves more like a physical muscle, and if you don't use it, it atrophies. The late Clifford Nass from Stanford did some genuinely unsettling research on this. He studied chronic multitaskers in the digital age and found that constant, relentless attention switching permanently reshapes the brain's architecture, specifically the prefrontal cortex. If you spend your day jumping between chat apps, emails, spreadsheets, and social feeds, you permanently damage your own ability to filter out irrelevant information. In one interview before he passed away, Nass described testing chronic multitaskers, expecting them to at least be good at switching between tasks quickly. They weren't. People who multitask constantly can't filter out irrelevant information, can't hold a working memory steady, and stay chronically distracted. They're worse at nearly everything, including the multitasking itself. And the most damning part is that they believe they're great at it, when really they've just trained their brains to never tolerate the absence of novelty. They're chasing a small hit of stimulation, which is exactly why the popular idea of a weekly digital detox is largely a physiological myth. You see this idea everywhere. Take 1 day a week off your phone to reset. But think about the biology. If you ate heavily processed food 6 days a week and then forced down a spinach salad on the seventh, you don't suddenly become healthy. Your underlying cellular structure is still built on the junk. If you spend 6 days a week gorging on hyper-stimulating digital distraction, turning your phone off for 1 day won't magically heal your neural pathways. You'll just spend that 1 day in withdrawal. You have to change the default operating system entirely, not just take an occasional day off from it. So how do you actually rehabilitate the brain? If the muscle has atrophied, what does physical therapy look like? Newport suggests something he calls productive meditation. You take a period where your body is occupied but your mind is free, walking the dog, taking a shower, commuting, and you deliberately force your attention onto a single professional problem, an outline for a presentation, a bug in some code, something specific. Newport himself used to do this on the walk between his apartment and his lab at MIT, a problem in his mind before he even started walking. But the crucial part is the friction involved. It's exhausting at first. Within 30 seconds, your brain starts to rebel, drifting toward dinner plans or an argument from yesterday, or the urge to check your phone. The actual workout happens in the moment you notice your mind wandering and deliberately drag it back to the problem. Do that 50 times over the course of a walk, and you're strengthening the exact same neural pathway you'd use for any other kind of deep, sustained focus. But productive meditation only works if you also deal with the external source of distraction. You can't rehab a knee injury while you keep hitting the same knee with a hammer. Which leads to Newport's genuinely ruthless device strategy, something like a 30-day social media packing party. It comes from R.Y. Eniko D. Moose, one of the minimalists. When he wanted to simplify his life, he didn't slowly throw things away piece by piece. He packed up every single belonging in his apartment into cardboard boxes, as if he were moving out entirely. Then, over 30 days, he only unpacked what he actively needed to survive: a toothbrush, a pan, a suit. By the end of the month, most of his belongings were still sitting in boxes. He simply didn't need them. So the idea is, do this with your digital life. But here's the key rule. You don't announce that you're leaving. No dramatic exit. No long post about taking a break for your mental health. You just stop logging in for 30 days in complete silence. And once those 30 days pass, you have to ask yourself two genuinely uncomfortable questions. First, would the past month have been noticeably better if you'd used that app the whole time? Usually, the honest answer is no. Second, did anyone actually notice or care that you weren't using it? That second question is deeply uncomfortable to sit with, because the real reason most people announce a social media break in the first place is a quiet, ego-driven belief that people are anxiously waiting on their commentary. We assume our small circle of followers will feel the absence of our opinions. Quitting cold, with no announcement, is unsettling precisely because it proves how little actually needs any one of us. For most people outside your immediate circle, nobody notices you're gone. The timeline simply fills the gap without you. It's a real blow to the ego, but it's also strangely freeing. It releases you from that constant, shallow exchange of digital approval, so you can actually get to the real work. But we do have to address the pushback this book gets, because looking closely at how real people respond to it, the limitations become impossible to ignore. This is the privilege problem. There are single mothers holding down exhausting administrative jobs, retail workers on constantly shifting schedules, nurses working triage, people managing serious attention difficulties. For a huge share of the workforce, a university professor telling them to disappear for 4 hours isn't just impractical, it's financially dangerous. One widely shared piece of criticism put it plainly, that this book works beautifully if you're an upper-class professional with staff to handle your logistics, but for someone carrying real debt and working shift work, it reads like being handed a luxury car when what you actually need is money for gas. And that criticism holds up. Tenure-track academia protects unstructured thinking time by design. That's essentially what the position is built for. But for a junior employee whose manager expects an instant reply on a messaging app, These philosophies are theoretical at best. Telling a customer service worker to go monastic is a bit like telling a fish to go for a jog. The entire environment rejects the premise from the start. It reveals a real blind spot in the book. The old idea that constant busyness equals value is often written directly into people's job structure. If your worth at work is measured by how instantly available you are, practicing deep work can be a genuinely risky, even rebellious act. So what does the honest, tested version of this actually look like? If the fish can't go for a jog but still needs to move, what does it do instead? If you don't have real autonomy over your schedule, the goal isn't Carl Jung's Stone Tower. The goal is fighting for 25 minutes. It's finding or asking for one single meeting, free block a week. As one piece of feedback pointed out, discipline compounds over time. 3 hours of real focused work will always beat 10 hours of distracted grinding. But if all you actually have is 30 precious minutes before the household wakes up, that 30 minutes becomes your lifeline. The scale of the approach has to match the reality of your actual life, and even small, consistent pockets of depth create a real advantage over time. If everyone around you is submerged in shallow work all day, even a modest daily block of real focus makes you stand out. Which brings us to the scrutiny around Newport's own life, especially looking back at this now. Newport has always said he's never had a social media account, and that part is consistent, but look at the rest of his output. He runs a long-running blog, writes for a major magazine, hosts a heavily sponsored weekly podcast, gives well-paid keynote talks. So is he really a monk-like figure, or has he simply built a large media presence around his own personal brand? It's a fair question. Deep work has essentially become his brand, and in some ways he's playing the same attention-driven game as the influencers he criticizes, just inside a niche where depth itself is the product. He still does an enormous amount of what would count as shallow work, podcast logistics, travel for keynotes, but he's extremely selective about it. He avoids the platforms that demand constant low-value input and leans entirely into the ones that build his credibility. It's a smart strategy, but it means the image of the pure disconnected scholar deserves a fair amount of skepticism. And beyond the personal brand question, there's a timing problem. The book came out in 2016. Now, remote work is simply normal for huge parts of the workforce, and that's the biggest practical challenge to his original advice. Back then, his suggestions relied heavily on physical separation. Close the door, go sit in the library. But when your kitchen table is your office, there's no door left to close. The interruption now lives permanently inside the same laptop you're trying to work on. It's like trying to lock the door to your study, except the person interrupting you is already sitting on your keyboard. Constant messaging and video calls are simply the fabric of remote work now. You can't ignore a chat channel if that small green dot next to your name is the only proof your manager has that you're actually working. The interruption has become a permanent resident, which means the need for deep work has only grown more urgent, even as it's become far harder to actually execute. You end up having to artificially construct the boundaries that used to exist on their own. But despite every one of these caveats, the privilege gap, remote work, the personal contradictions, there's still one clear, almost mathematical truth in this book that cuts through all the noise. If you take away nothing else, remember this one framework. Newport borrows a concept from the world of execution and strategy, built around the difference between two kinds of measures. A result measure is the ultimate goal, the final outcome. Papers published, a novel finished, a target hit. The problem is, by the time you can measure it, the work is already done. It's history. A behavior measure, on the other hand, tracks the specific daily actions that actually drive that final outcome. It's something you have direct control over every single day. Here's what that looks like in practice. Say you're writing a book. The final outcome is the completed manuscript. The behavior that actually drives it is the number of hours spent that day in real, focused writing. Newport's real argument is that the thing worth ruthlessly tracking is that daily behavior, not the total hours you spent at a desk. Time at your desk is a comfortable illusion. Most people have no real sense of how little deep work they actually do in a given day. Picture it. It's 2 in the afternoon on an ordinary weekday. You've been sitting there since 8 in the morning, completely worn out. You've sent 40 emails, sat through 3 video calls, half listening, reorganized your task list twice, and your mind tells you, I worked incredibly hard today. But measuring hours at a desk, to judge how much deep work happened, is a lot like measuring how far you drove today by counting the time you spent sitting in your car in the driveway. Sure, you were technically inside the vehicle, the engine was even running, but you never actually went anywhere, you were just adjusting the radio and the mirrors. What's genuinely revealing is what happens the moment you introduce a real measurement. Noteport suggests something simple, a tally on a piece of paper next to your keyboard. Every time you complete 1 full hour of truly uninterrupted, deeply focused work, no email, no phone, you add a mark. Try that for a week, and the results are usually shocking. Honestly, a little devastating. You walk into the week assuming you're essential and constantly busy, and then you track it, and you find your real deep hours sit under 2 a day, sometimes under 1. Everything else was context switching, defending against your inbox, sitting through meetings that didn't need you there, and quietly soothing yourself by browsing the web. That tally mark, not your color-coded calendar, is the real scoreboard of your professional life. And that uncomfortable realization is usually where the actual change begins. Once you face the fact that you might only be producing 1 real hour of value a day, it gets a lot harder to keep defending the shallow work. You stop justifying the broken machine sitting in the corner of the room. You start fighting for a second hour, and then a third, and you start treating your attention like the genuinely scarce, valuable thing it actually is. So what does all of this mean for you, listening right now, whether you're in traffic? The real question was never whether you should delete an app or force yourself out of bed at an impossibly early hour to feel like some kind of monk. The real question is whether your current job, your life, your daily structure gives you any room at all to go deep. And if it doesn't, can you fight for it? Can you steal even 30 minutes back from the shallow parts of your day, starting tomorrow morning? Because if you don't fight for it, the cost goes far beyond just feeling stressed or scattered. As automation and artificial intelligence take over more and more of the shallow, easily repeated tasks, the tasks we've historically used to look busy, the wider economy is likely to split sharply in two. Not just along lines of wealth, but along the ability to sustain real attention. The people who can protect their focus, who can sit inside the discomfort of a hard problem and produce something that can't easily be replaced, will be the ones shaping the tools and the culture everyone else lives inside. And everyone else will be left reacting to those systems, fed a constant stream of shallow distraction, their attention quietly harvested by the people who learned how to focus when almost no one else did. It comes down to a simple question of agency. Are you going to be the one shaping your own attention, or are you content being just another NOHD in someone else's network, staying frantically busy until you quietly fade away? Which brings us right back to why Cal Newport was so afraid in the first place, watching his own colleagues fade. Don't let your professional legacy end up being an empty inbox and a handful of liked posts. Take control of the machine. So drop this in the comments wherever you're listening. Monastic or rhythmic? Which one could you actually pull off this week? Fight for your focus. Keep exploring what you're actually capable of. See you next time.